Quite a number of YouTubers have been making videos about leaving California recently. California used to be the land of dreams. People once came in large numbers from around the nation and the world to make California, and particularly Los Angeles, a promising place to build incredible dreams. In the 1950s, population growth in the Los Angeles area averaged about 5% a year. That's outstanding. LA was the place to be. It was one of the most modern cities in the world with weather that the rest of the world dreamed about. It had highways and freeways that allowed a rising middle class to get from one end of the city to the other. There was a time period when Los Angeles was a forward-thinking city with regard to transportation. You could get anywhere on our freeways. Businesses thrived. The iconic Capitol Records building was created in this era, which ushered in the beginning of Los Angeles being a wonderful location for artists to practice their craft. In the 1950s, the city did not believe that the government should run the economy. Sure, the local city government did come up with common sense laws such as banning backyard incinerators to reduce smog, but Los Angeles was otherwise quite a free location. Even today, people still visit the iconic sites around Los Angeles, including Rodeo Drive. It's a wonderful place to visit for a period of time, shop in wonderful stores, enjoy the sunshine. But people leave before one sees the negatives, such as the confiscatory taxes, the number of tents and people sleeping on the street, the crime, and the crowded conditions of the city. At some point in time, the politicians started to feel that they did not have to represent the people. The elite started to ask not what the public wanted, but what other elitists thought. There was a time period when politicians stopped caring about whether the roads were adequately maintained. Gas taxes were always raised, but nothing was actually done to fix roads. Schools started to fall behind as politicians focused on supporting special interest groups instead of parents and kids. Taxes always went up, never down, but nothing was actually ever really improved. The public started to vote for one party, and only one party, and a number of dissenting views started to decline. It was hard to find any place where someone could explain the financial situation of the state outside of the dominant establishment that squelched all outside opinions. People left the state of California, but no one seemed to care. When Elon Musk said he was leaving California, some politicians used profanities and said it was good that he was leaving. Good riddance. In what other industry aside from the government would a business mock its customers for not wanting to participate in that business anymore? When I go to Starbucks, if I'm dissatisfied, the people there will try to do anything in order to try to fix the problems that exist. There are some indications that people are starting to get fed up with how things are, though. For one thing, we have the recall of the Governor Gavin Newsom. One YouTuber is even running on the California recall to try to save California. Me, Kevin, has recently been running for California governor and will be an official candidate on the recall election. This is an optimistic development because this shows that someone is willing to identify some of the problems that exist in the state of California and is willing to try to fix some of the issues, which is really important. So let's get to it. So one of the candidates who is running in the California recall with the aim of trying to change the trajectory of California is a man by the name of Kevin Pavlov. And his name is Me Kevin on YouTube. You may have seen some of his videos. And he actually has a very detailed platform on some of the things that he wants to change. In fact, he's actually the only candidate I know who is actually running in the California recall. I know that's a little bit surprising, considering I'm sure there are plenty of people, but since I only watch YouTube videos, I only know about Kevin. So I'm actually going to go through some of the plans that Kevin has. One thing that's going for Kevin that I like, even before even looking at any of his plans, is the fact that he has private sector experience. He worked in real estate. He actually did some things that actually didn't pan out, like I think it was a construction firm. And I like the fact that he's very transparent and detailed, and he gives his opinions about all things related to finance on a day-to-day basis. So I actually am very favorable views towards him as a person. But when I look at some of his platform, some of it is helping things to move forward, some of it is actually stepping in the wrong direction, and sometimes it's not radical enough. As an example, Kevin actually, his idea for the California state income tax is to is basically so that nobody pays income tax if they make less than $250,000. Now, that actually sounds like a great plan, especially for the vast majority of the citizens of California, since most people don't make $250,000 a year. But there is a big problem with this. The problem is that people who hire people do tend to make more than $250,000. And how do you keep these people in the state of California when Texas and Florida and Nevada are out there and they're providing people with a far better opportunity out there with 0%. Also, even though he gets rid of the state income tax for everybody under who is making less than $250,000, he keeps a pretty high state income tax rate of 5 to 7% for people who make more than $250,000. And I think that's kind of a ridiculous rate, because that really is not competitive nationally. I know that California's rates are so high that, as it sounds now, that's almost a 50% cut from where they are at the moment. So it sounds really generous. Hey, we're going to cut the rates 50%, but hey, you know what? They're still not that competitive on a national basis. And I think that that's something to keep in mind, is that it's really not radical enough. If you're going to focus on the state income tax, you need to just get rid of it. And the same is true for the corporate income tax. It needs to be abolished entirely. I mean, we're competing with states like Nevada to have 0% rate. You can't compete with zero. Further, another part of Meet Kevin's plan is to basically allow Las Vegas style gambling in the state of California in order to receive more tax revenue, and that can help to offset a lot of the reduction in the state income tax. But there's a problem with allowing more legalized gambling. For one thing, there already is a lot of gambling in California. People don't realize it, but we have the state lotto, we have the Indian casinos where people can do slot machines if that's what they want. And there are also a number of, there's like a casino in the city of Commerce where people can do cards and stuff like that. So we already have some gambling. And the other issue is that a lot of people consider gambling as a really regressive tax, because most of the people who lose money in casinos are people who make below the average income. So these are people who really are going to lose. Are you really trying to make money from people losing their shirt in casinos in order to pay for things? That's really something just to keep in mind. Also, it's not really apparent that there's a demand to have Las Vegas style gambling in the state of California. Where would all these casinos be? Las Vegas has had a lot of time to develop the infrastructure in order to really be a gambling powerhouse. Not only that, but even Las Vegas, they're actually starting to de-emphasize gambling, because younger people are kind of more skeptical, and a lot of them have taken a lot of statistics classes perhaps, and so they realize that gambling is really a waste of time and you're not going to really make money from gambling. So as a result of that, I think that there's not as much money from gambling as people think. I think that it would actually be much wiser, instead of focusing on trying to be a gambling powerhouse, to focus on California being a manufacturing powerhouse and make it so that we reduce the costs that it's actually possible to manufacture things in California. I mean, nothing is really made in California, and a lot of that is really just due to the regulations. I think casinos, they don't really produce anything. If you think about it, it's just people going there, they lose their money, and then it goes into the to the revenue of these major corporations that run casinos. And sure, it can be fun, and Las Vegas is a special example of that. But actually, Las Vegas did not originally set out to be some global paradise for gambling originally. It just was on the books originally. Just kind of was a thing to do. Oh, okay, we're gonna have legalized gambling. They never set out to say, hey, we want to have the biggest corporations set up here and have super giant gambling opportunities. That wasn't the way it started. It kind of happened organically. So even if you said, hey, we're going to become Las Vegas tomorrow, that does not necessarily mean it would happen, even if it was legal to do. Now, one area of Meet Kevin's political platform that actually is quite good is homeless emergency. He would declare an emergency. Okay, well, that's pretty easy. I think we can all agree with that. But I think he also is onto something when he includes medical and substance, mental health, and educational support immediately available. I think the big problem with homelessness has to do with substance abuse. As everybody knows, there's a lot of drug use, and I think that he's basically said nobody is going to be on the street in 60 days. And he said he would also, the National Guard will be tasked with compassionately serving our homeless community until our future facilities are built. So I think he basically would be building some kind of major facilities to house the homeless, and also to have some kind of drug rehabilitation program. I think we all know that this is a major problem. I don't think that most of the people who are homeless are there just because they had a tough month. I think it goes way deeper than that. And substance abuse problems that's definitely one of the biggest issues with regard to homelessness. The one troubling part that I have on Meet Kevin's platform has to do with the future schools. It says something like at 14, students have a choice to attend a future school. Not really clear, not defined. Combines college, trade school, high school, and financial education. And students graduate debt-free for free at 18. I think he's trying to basically say, instead of high school, we're going to create something that's kind of a hybrid of high school, college, and trade school. And as a result, kids will be a lot smarter. But I think that this is where I think Meet Kevin makes mistakes. I think he sometimes is living with the current paradigm, because this is still a top-down kind of system where the governor would set this up and decide how this curriculum would work. And it would be very easy for the teachers' unions to still basically run the show and dictate how the programs work and water down the standards. I think instead of this kind of system, what we need to have is something way more dramatic. In other words, the money should just follow the kids. If the kid wants to use the money for homes, if the parents basically want the kid to be homeschooled, the money will flow there. If the kid wants to go to trade school, the money will flow there. If the kid has an idea of wants to go to a private school, that's where they will go. So, and even if it wants to go to a government-run, quote-unquote, public school, that's where the money should flow. Basically, the money flows a child, and that creates the market competition that enables things to work. When you basically set a top-down system, and you say, well, we're going to really radically create high school, we're going to combine the trade schools and the high schools and the college and just put it all together, and then they'll become financially literate. I think that's a huge problem, because it's sort of like we're making the same mistakes that we made when we created these government-run high schools to begin with. It sounds great. Hey, everybody's to learn. Everybody is going to get the same education. Everybody's going to learn a lot of things. But then what happens as time goes on? The parents don't have much political power when it comes down to how these schools are run, because they have jobs and they have other things that they're doing, whereas the unions, as a result, run the show. They dictate the curriculum. They dictate how hard it is to fire bad teachers. And so that's the big problem. We want to get rid of the monopoly, Kevin. I think that's where that's a weakness. You need to anticipate what will happen, even if your program is really happens. You have to decide, hey, what's going to happen later on? Even if you get a great reform passed, it's going to be watered down as time goes on, and the interest groups are going to take over, especially as their political power wanes. But if you can create the system anew, and it's based upon market economic, real capitalism, like the money flows to the kid instead of just the government-run institution, then you're onto something. So I think Meet Kevin needs to work on that a little bit more. Now, one part of the Meet Kevin program that I really like is his policy with regard to housing. I think because he has experience as a real estate agent, he actually knows quite a bit about the problems with regard to our housing policy. One thing that I think is really, really brilliant is his solution to deal with not in my backyard is, where if you want to get a permit and you have to deal with the local bureaucracy and the comment period, and you have to deal with neighbors who want to do everything to stop your development. Basically, he wants to do something similar to what Japan has done. In Japan, building codes are done at the state level. I think it's actually done at the country level, and there really is not any of this local bureaucracy where the city comes up with ridiculous zoning that makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to build housing or new buildings. Actually, Japan, despite being a crowded place, doesn't have any housing crisis, and a lot of that has to do with the fact is you can make tiny buildings, you can make them narrow, and you really don't have to deal with the local busybodies who want to dictate how housing is to be built. And I think that's a really, really important thing. Some people say, oh, it's all about local control, and no, local control, when it comes down to this, it really has to do with allowing your neighbors to determine your property rights, to say, hey, you shouldn't be able to build, you shouldn't have the right to build if that's what your choice is. And I don't think that's really right. I don't think that your neighbors should really create a problem and slow down development just because they have the ability to speak out. I think that is a huge problem. And he's onto something. If you can remove all that to the state level and nobody can really block development anymore, then it would allow supply to meet demand. It would basically mean you could build, you wouldn't have to deal with opposition. There will of course be building codes, but it'll be at the state level. So if you want an earthquake rule or whatever, okay, that has to be uniform throughout the state. But you can't have a rule that says something like, in this neighborhood you can't build more than 3 stories tall for an apartment unless you apply that throughout the whole state. So I think that would be a really, really good policy, and Meet Kevin is onto something with that. Another area where Meet Kevin is totally on the mark with regard to fixing problems has to do with transportation. His solution is so simple and so remarkably brilliant that I actually kind of wish that I had thought of it myself. He basically relies on the private sector to solve our transportation problems, just like we rely on our private sector to solve any kind of other problem. Like, hey, I need to eat something, where do I go? I don't go to the government, I go to a cafe or a restaurant, something like that. So one of the big issues with regard to transportation is it's kind of run in a very, here's a pretty cool car, by the way. Anyway, so when it comes down to transportation, we all use the same highway, and it's kind of run in a very socialistic way. It doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, in a hurry, not in a hurry, everybody goes on the same highway, and it gets filled up, and it just really wastes a lot of people's time. And so I actually went to a state where they kind of have adopted the Meet Kevin approach. It's called Florida. They have a lot of private roads, private toll roads, and the truth is, if you want to get anywhere, you can get there pretty efficiently. It's called capitalism. You're willing to pay, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an arm and a leg, but if you're in a hurry, it actually makes sense. It might be worth your time to use the toll road. And the other irony is that for people who are on the toll road, they won't be on the other kinds of inefficient transportation systems where everybody is on them. So the more you have people on these kind of toll roads and different kinds of transportation mediums, the less people there will be on the other kinds of forms of transportation. So I think it's a win-win. It's a very smart move on Meet Kevin's part. Okay, so one area where Meet Kevin really misses the ball has to do with his so-called future courts. And I think this mistake has to do with the fact that Meet Kevin didn't go to law school, so he doesn't really realize that his solution actually makes things way, way worse. Like, for one thing, he said he wants to allow small claims limits raised to $100,000. And I think that's a huge, huge mistake. And the major reason why is because the reason why we have such a low limit in terms of small claims has to do with due process. Because when you're in small claims, it's really just rough justice. You don't have the opportunity to really try to attack the other side as well as you can in a normal court. You can't really dispute the kind of discovery that you would like. I mean, the whole thing is just a huge mess. You basically would be so easy to file a $100,000 lawsuit, small claims, and you wouldn't be able to really defend yourself as well as you can in a normal trial setting. You're not even allowed to bring your own attorney in a small claim. So I don't think he realizes that would make things way, way worse. People would be even more emboldened to file lawsuits with much bigger judgments. And I think that a lot of businesses would actually really flee the state, because then they could really be fleeced for a lot more money. And people, so this kind of solution is not a solution. It actually just makes California way worse when it comes down to our civil court system. Number 10 has to do with Meet Kevin's philosophy on the criminal justice system. It says instant focus on community policing and reintegrating trust with law enforcement and communities. And I think he's basically saying nonviolent inmates won't have to go to prison. They'll have to do community service or something like that. The problem is that this is already done. People who are so-called nonviolent, they're not really serving prison sentences in large numbers, so I don't think this really changes the ball very much. Another great idea that Meet Kevin has is to legalize the handyman economy. A lot of people don't realize that so many of the people who work on so many jobs in terms of fixing people's homes, a lot of these people aren't even licensed, but they can be under this system. I think it would actually make sense to make it very, very easy to either get a license, or maybe for some of these things we should think about removing the license. But I think it makes sense to get rid of the barriers to people working, because the more people working, the better it is for the economy as a whole, especially if you can get it out of the underground economy. So another idea that I oppose from Meet Kevin is the mandated local manufacturing employment and California H-1Bs. It says, on day one, request every company in California provide a one-page proposal on how they can help California. Well, isn't that the job of the governor, to come up with ideas how to save the state? Anyway, it's an interesting homework assignment for companies. But in return for doing this one-page assignment, they'll help localize it. We will permit new, additional, and lawful immigration to help them fill jobs they can with local hires. Well, the truth is, the governor has no power over federal immigration law, so Meet Kevin has no power to really change what the law is with regard to immigration. So this is more like a utopian idea that he has, and I'm not so sure there really is a California worker shortage though. Now, one idea I really oppose, is number 17 on Meet Kevin's list of proposals, is the carbon tax. This is just a great, terrible idea. We would be the first state to institute a carbon tax, incentivizes green energy, blah, blah, blah. Now, the problem with this is that California is, the one problem that California has is not because we don't have enough taxes and fees. So Meet Kevin realizes that California is burdened with regulations and fees, but then over here with the carbon tax, his idea is to create more of the same. And I don't know why he came up with this. I really don't. I think it's very gimmicky. And California already has a terrible green policy. It's called the cap and trade. So motorists pay a lot more for gas here than we do in other states. So I think adding a carbon tax on top of that is a terrible idea, especially because a lot of people quite naturally actually have some skepticism towards the idea of man-made climate change. I mean, how am I able to change the climate? I really think that the sun over here has a lot more to do with it than me. And then finally, it's called the green wave, but it's not necessarily about green energy. It's about alleviating traffic, mandating the green wave statewide. All traffic lights are synced to posted speed limits so that as a straight path drivers consistently hit green lights to increase the flow of traffic. Well, we actually do have that in the city of LA. It's supposed to be synced, but it doesn't necessarily work as well as people think. And I don't think that this would necessarily change things dramatically, but it actually is worth pursuing to see if we can make the lights more efficient. That definitely is a good idea. So on balance, I can say I do not support Meet Gavin for governor, because while I do support some of his policies, like reducing taxes, regulations, and making it so it's a lot tougher for not in my backyardism to have an influence on local policies, I still think that he doesn't quite understand or get the problems in California, because he doesn't seem to understand that it's really the mindset of just being government centric, everything being about more taxes and more control over the economy. And the carbon tax is a perfect representation of having control over the economy, an attempt to say, hey, you were doing something bad, or we're going to try to discourage it in order to manipulate people to adopt forms of energy that they don't necessarily support. So that's not something I can get behind. I'm sure there are probably other people who actually understand that California has moved way beyond what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a promised libertarian kind of dream where you could have whatever agenda or goal you wanted in your life. That was up to you. It wasn't something that the government could do. We weren't waiting for Meet Kevin's so-called future schools to fix our problems. The idea is that we would actually decide for ourselves what we want, rather than wait for some politician who would come up with these ideas. Anyway, I think that this is a sign that even though California is in trouble and some people realize it, I'm not exactly sure that people have really reached the idea of what conclusions we need to fix this state. Anyway, that's Michael signing off. Please click the like button and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in another video. See ya.